Hi guys, welcome back to Two Worlds Collide podcast. On today's episode, we have Jordan Knight. Jordan is the founder of Migration Watch Australia, a group focused on discussing and advocating for policies around reducing immigration levels in Australia. His views centre on how mass migration affects housing, wages, and the broader social fabric of our country. In this episode, we discuss immigration, housing, the political scene, the importance of free speech, and government censorship. I hope you guys enjoy.
Excellent.
All right, you ready to roll?
Ready to go.
All right, let's get after it. Jordan Knight, welcome to Two Worlds Collide podcast, mate. How you going?
Very well, mate. How are you?
Yeah, very good. In sunny Sydney, so it's beautiful weather here, and I just came up from Canberra where it was a little bit colder. But as always, Sydney is quite good weather, and it's quite beautiful up here. And mate, you've been saying some interesting things about immigration. I've personally been following your account on Twitter for quite some time.
Nice.
So, you know, when I started this podcast, there was a list of people that I wanted on this podcast, and your name was definitely on it because I think you're saying some stuff that is extremely important for Australians to hear. And you know, not all Australians. It's not really going to affect your older generation Australians, but your younger generation Australians that want to get into the housing market, want to have roads that are not so clogged up and stuff like that. Your younger generation, these are the ones that you're trying to stick up for now and you're trying to talk about it. So, mate, let's just firstly, just give me a bit of background on yourself and why you are so passionate about immigration in Australia and the rising numbers that's happening at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. And I really appreciate you having me on.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so what got me interested in terms of background? So I grew up in suburban Brisbane, a place called Wynnum, which is a bit of it used to be a bit of a manufacturing port, sort of fishing area. And it actually used to be a resort town and used to have some money. But over the sort of decades in the 20th century, it kind of got progressively poorer and there's a lot of social housing and stuff like that. We were doing okay. And my old man was a union leader of the Plumbers Union Queensland. So I kind of grew up around the sort of Labor movement a little bit. Mum was sort of, she went back and forwards between Labor and Liberal. And so I always, I used to go to the May Day marches with my old man. And so there was always this element of, taking on the big guy sort of stuff. But and as I got older, I became a bit more conservative, a bit more liberal. Labor wasn't really speaking for me. So I always thought I was a bit of a LNP, young LNP sort of guy. I mean, I never went into the young LNP, but I always thought that, that's where I was. But as a sort of political journey evolved, I sort of realized I was like, actually, hang on, there is a perspective here where you can be on the right and still sort of take on the big guy sort of thing. And I think a big one, the big issue around that is immigration. I mean, immigration disproportionately affects, as you say, younger people and the vulnerable. The battler, the average Australian, things like that, while it also disproportionately benefits the big guys, that benefits big businesses, big universities, the government, the sort of parallel. And I also found that nobody was really speaking for me on the issue and speaking for younger people on the issue. And nobody was really talking about it. So it was kind of this this long political journey. That's the short of it. But the real sort of the most recent sort of moment for me, I'm sorry if I'm rambling about it, but was during the COVID lockdowns. Now, don't get me wrong, didn't love them, to be honest. But I did notice that the COVID lockdowns, when a lot of international students went home, a lot of short-term visas and whatnot, people went home. It was the one time where my rent went down, so my rent got cheaper, and my wage, because businesses were looking for workers, my wage went up because there was a hot job market at the moment. So I was like, fantastic, things are looking great. I can save for a house. Things are good again. Of course, Albert came in. Albert said he was going to cut immigration, of course, before he got in. He got in. He had a job summit where he invited all the big business people over to chat about it, and they all obviously said, look, we need workers. And so he opened the gates, brought in nearly 800,000 people in 1 year. And my friends and my living standards and rent, and it just went to shit again, basically, to be perfectly frank. So I just started posting and talking about it, and have been ever since, really, just angry about it. But yeah.
Yeah. So, but that's the way you should do it, right? You you shouldn't have to lead to violence or anything like that. You should be able to openly post about it on free speech platforms to be able to give yourself a voice, which is, I think, where the world is unfortunately moving away from at the moment. There's, like, you tell me, did you ever hear the term misinformation before 2020 or disinformation?
No, not at all. And the funny thing about misinformation, disinformation, is that, I mean, really, look, sure, yeah, there's always misinformation, there's always disinformation, right? But I've found that somewhat cynically that people who sort of throw that term around are using it just to shut people up, right? It's used as a tool to sort of, and like, just my whole thing is, if you get it out there, let people sort of interpret and decide, sort of thing. Don't sort of use governments to shut down speech. Yeah,
which is the world is turning towards that shutting down of the speech. Like we've seen it in the recent elections over in America in 2020. You know, there was big government, FBI colluded with or worked with Instagram. They worked with Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg recently just came out and said that happened. They also worked with Twitter. You know, Elon Musk came and dropped the Twitter files after he bought it. So, you know, there is a lot of that stuff happening in the world, and we're going to dive into, you know, all of this stuff. But I want to sort of get down to some of the numbers in regards to immigration and sort of what they've done year on year. So obviously it was pulled back a lot in COVID. A lot of people went home. But what was it like pre-COVID, the numbers, and then what are they like now?
Yeah, that's a good point. So generally we've been growing our population by about 1.5% for the last 20 odd years or thereabouts, which is actually, you know, 1.5% doesn't sound like a whole lot, but comparatively to the rest of the world, it's massive. Like you get 1% of your population every single year. And largely that's been driven by immigration. It's kind of worked though. Like we had it in the sort of, it was always between like from the year 2000, it was always between like the low six figures. So like, you know, 120,000, you know, 200,000, you know, thereabouts. And
which is probably manageable, right?
It was at the time, because don't forget as well, we're going through like a mining boom. So there's a bit of money coming in, and, you know, and look, I do think that it was a bit of it has a long tail, and it will have problems. Those 20 years will have problems that will go on for some time, and they're still sort of coming out. But yes, yeah, absolutely, it was more manageable. But yeah, during COVID or after COVID, you know, businesses screamed out for more, and so it went from what I think was like 120 or thereabouts, and now is at gross terms like 737,000 in 1 year. So that is astronomical. We grew our population by 2.5% in 1 year. Massive numbers, right? Just unsustainable. And I saw that, you know, they keep saying that they're going to cut it. And, you know, the opposite is happening. In July this year, we brought in something like 4,000 international students alone. That's not just migrants. Like it's, you know, so it's still out of control completely. And they're like, well, we're going to taper it back, but they're going to taper it back to what was high numbers. I mean, it was manageable before COVID, but I would argue that we've got to go back to levels that are sort of lower than pre-COVID, in my opinion.
Because, you know, if they came out and said, oh, we're going to reduce it by 50%, they're still reducing it to 400,000, which was still 4 times the amount pre-COVID, which is is crazy. And they, you know, they might come out and that might be a big headline for them. We've reduced it by 50%, but what was it pre-COVID? It was 120,000. So you didn't really reduce it by anything.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, and the government preys on people are too busy these days to be across the statistics and figures, right? Like, and that's what I'm trying to plug that information gap with Migration Watch. But you know, people are working harder, longer hours, stuck in traffic longer, so they don't have time to be across the exact number of people. So when the government comes out and says we're slashing it by 50%, you're like, great, you know,
awesome.
Yeah. Turns out it's actually just going from like 1 trillion to 500 billion. Right?
Yeah,
like, doesn't really mean a whole lot, but it's just another classic government spin thing, really.
Yeah, it's and Oh, there was a really funny thing that the Albanese government set up the other day, not the other day. It was probably months ago, right? And they set up a disinformation centre.
Yeah.
And people just wrote in about the misinformation that Albanese government has written in and not actual misinformation. So they got caught up in their own bullshit quite a bit, which was, when I was reading it, I just started laughing. I was like, that's the Australian people coming out.
Yeah.
But look, back on immigration, it's I've had friends of mine talk to me saying that their commute to work now is, from pre-COVID levels to now is 25 minutes longer, and they're only leaving 30 minutes from, where they were, and it's taking them so much longer. I've noticed gyms are way more packed than they ever were, and I'm not racist at all, but there's a lot of Indians around. There's a lot of Chinese around as well in these gyms that I've just never really seen before. But that's mostly immigration. And these numbers are, I think, choking the system quite a bit. Like, look at housing and where housing has went from 2020. And now I'm only going to speak from Adelaide because I've only really done research in Adelaide because that's where I'm from. But housing in 2020 in Adelaide with the medium house market was 600,000. Now it's about 900,000. Well, I've got houses selling around the block from me for 1.3 million dollars. We bought our house in 2018 for 550,000. Look, we've done a little bit of work to that house, but not for it to be 65% the original price it was. And it is pricing young Australians out of the market. First home buyers cannot get in the market anymore, and if they do get in the market, they're paying the mortgage percentage fee on these things and mortgage insurance. They're getting whacked 30 to 40 grand. And it is just the only people that are having fun with this sort of stuff are comedians because they're making jokes out of it and big banks that are getting the lenders out of it. And, I fear, and this is the reason I'm talking to you so we can get the message out there, but I fear if this goes on too long, we're going to be in an irreversible state, which we can't fix because we can't build houses fast enough. And there's also still issues with importing timber and stuff, you know what I mean? So there's so many issues around the place that aren't getting filled, but we're still just pouring the cup up until it overflows. And we're currently at a place where it's overflowing and the cost of living is up. The roads are busier. Trying to fly, right? Trying to fly and hop on a plane. My tickets are double what they are to get around the place to what they were pre-COVID. So it's very, very alarming. And the unfortunate thing is as well, and I want to grab your feedback on this. If you talk up about these issues, you get, and I've had this happen to me in some of my posts, you get labelled a Trump supporter, you get labelled a bigot, you get labelled a racist. And it's also not just in immigration. If you talk up against that, if you talk up against biological males playing in female sports, you get called transphobic, you get called every name under the sun. If you question the government about their spending or the amount of money they've printed, you get called a conspiracy theorist. If you question anything about climate, you get called a climate denier. And if you question anything about what happened in COVID, you get called a conspiracy theorist. And we're in a world, and we were just talking about this off air before, where if you talk about these issues and if you have what I think is common sense, then you can get attacked, and you can get attacked verbally. And they seem to be using words like fascist, racist, Trump supporter, bigot, because they don't have anything else to say about the facts. So what's your take on, because I know you get some criticism, but what's your take on, taking this criticism, and staying true to what you believe?
Yeah, definitely. Look, I think a lot of what you said is 100% correct. I think what the left, and it is largely the left, I mean, let's be honest, and what they are really good at is sort of positioning themselves as the high status side,
I have a moral compass which is more direct than yours.
Exactly, which is it is effectively like moral elitism or moral supremacism. I think it's wrong frankly. But they at least have sort of positioned themselves, and you do have to give it to them. They are smart operators in doing that, right? And they've sort of bent, the use of language and the concept of free speech and whatnot to their will. Really, I think the best antidote, the best way to sort of answer that is just we have truth on our side. We know that it's talking about seeing that the roads are changing, the composition of your town changing isn't racist. It's true. It's a fact, and you need to be able to talk about it. And so, I mean, the moment anybody tries to sort of position themselves as moral supremacist, it's your duty as an Australian, as a good Australian, to knock them down a peg, because they don't deserve the position that they have placed themselves in. Also, I would say as well, like in terms of like being called racist, bigot, whatever, don't let the enemy define you. Like you define yourself, and you should. It's like. Sometimes I was actually speaking to somebody about this before, just getting a coffee with them, and we were sort of saying like when you get attacked by groups of people, maybe it's like a Twitter pylon or like an article or something like that. Because you're a good person, you inherently think, oh, maybe I've done something wrong and maybe they've got something, but you've actually got to take a step back and you got to be like, oh, actually, I've not done anything wrong. Like it's just that they leverage your guilty conscience as a good person against you. It's
you put that perfectly. They prey on the innocence of people, I think, and I don't know where I heard this. It might have been on a Joe Rogan podcast, where they prey on people's feelings, and you're like, oh, but what about poor this or poor that, or what about these people here? Well, no, I'm being true to myself and to caring about Australians, and when I have kids and the world that I want them to grow up in. That's what I am, coming out and talking to yourself about this. Because, look, I think I have a cool podcast with, a good backstory, and we were talking about it before, and I've had cool and fun guests on. And for me, this is leaping out a bit, and I could get, attacked for having this podcast, but with you, but I don't give a fuck.
Nice.
Because I personally think that, if we don't talk about these issues and if we don't raise them, then what happens when people stop talking about issues is they generally start fighting.
Yeah, that's true. That's a very good point.
If we can continuously talk about these issues in a very safe, fundamental way, where we're not attacking each side, we're just coming at facts, then we can sit down what Parliament should be and talk about these decisions like that and make decisions as a collective group. Then that's a really sustainable system that we can run with. But when one side is on a bit of a force to censor, monitor, and quieten another side for having a political opinion or view, I think that's when things become dangerous. And, we've seen it time and time again in history. If you try and quieten someone and you try and quieten a small party, that small party can just gain a lot of momentum, and it can become so big that it can almost take over the world in many situations. And having free speech and having the importance of speaking to each other, I think, is the most important thing that we need to have going forward. So we avoid stuff like Russia and Ukraine and what's happening in the Middle East at the moment. Devastating stuff. But that's when words stop and fighting starts.
No, I completely agree. And I think Nigel Farage or somebody as well said this. It's like the left or whoever should want us to have these conversations, even if they find them uncomfortable. They should want us to have these conversations, because if we don't, the people that will come after us are going to be way worse, right? Like you say, the people. If we get shut down, the people that will follow us naturally are going to be far worse than we are, right? So if I was on the left or whatever and trying to shut down debate, I would be doing myself a disservice. I think it's our ancestors were onto something when they sort of held the idea of free speech in sort of high regard, right? Like I think that they weren't dumb people. There was actually there was a self preservation to letting the other guy speak, even if you disagree with it, because it can devolve rapidly if you don't, right? So
definitely, and yeah, it's it's a situation that's very sticky, but it's going downhill very fast. And I just think with more people like yourself coming out and just very calmly stating facts is very, very important. Now, look, I think, and this is my personal opinion, like a country like Australia does need immigration, but not at the numbers that they're at now. So I think immigration, like maybe 100,000, 200,000 people, I think that is sustainable and it's good for the economy. But when it's 4 times, sometimes more, it might even be 5 times soon, that number, that's when it becomes, and this hasn't happened over a 30-year period. This has happened over literally a 4-year period. And it's just an issue that I want people to hear. So, probably my next thing is, I want to sort of dive into, now I've sort of talked about the rental crisis on my behalf in what's happening in Adelaide. I'm not huge across what's happening everywhere else. So I do have a lot of friends that, that live in Sydney and are paying quite a bit in rent, or that have been lucky and bought before pre-COVID. So there are different stories out there, but I want to hear it from yourself. What's sort of happening on the eastern coast in regards to the rental crisis and people living there? There's certain now people that are living in tents and people coming in are getting gifted free accommodation. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's tough, and it's tough across a lot of cities. Like I said, I'm from Brisbane. I get up there a lot, and it used to be the case that Sydney was known as the busy big city and tough to live, but Brisbane was the big country town, they used to say, and it was easier going. But now Brisbane is becoming Sydney. The exact same problems. It's becoming unaffordable in terms of rent and in terms of buying houses. It's becoming busy. Like I think Brisbane has, one of the worst traffic, problems in the world. I saw recently. So, yeah, you cannot pour 800,000 people in, 1 million people in, and not grow infrastructure or housing at the same time. It's terrible politics. But I'll give you a story about when I was up in Brisbane recently. I was in Wynnum, the area that I grew up in, and I went to a park that I used to sort of throw the ball in, take the dog down to, and it was a beautiful bayside park, and now it has people sleeping in it in tents, which has never happened. I've never in my life growing up and when I'm seeing people in tents in the park, and I was like, well, that's obviously very bad, but Brisbane has a housing crisis and things are obviously gone wrong. So maybe this is just a blip on the radar. But then across the street, are these apartment blocks that are getting built as well. And so simultaneously, we are building the houses, and yet people are still going homeless. I mean, obviously something's gone wrong in that mixture there. So I mean, the factor is obvious. We're bringing in too many people to handle. I think the major question is like, okay, we've kind of diagnosed the problem, right? We're bringing in too many migrants. Why? Why are we bringing in too many migrants? Well, a big problem is that, and we were sort of speaking about this before we started, that the governments get lobbied, right? It's no secret. Governments get lobbied largely by wealthy interests. I mean, they get lobbied by all sorts of community groups, but they do have. The big businesses of the world have more money to be more professional, get in the doors of these people. And so, if you just look at the press releases or the statements from people, in companies like, lobby groups like the BCA, the Business Council of Australia, ACCI, the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, they're this isn't a conspiracy. They're constantly crying out for more migrants, even when we have a lot of migrants, right? And the reason they do that is because it's good for business. I mean, it means that they have more consumers to sell products to. Means they have more workers, and so if you've got more workers competing for less jobs, you can pay to the lowest wage workers sort of thing. So it keeps wages down. Wages at the moment, real wages in Australia, are at 2009 levels, right? So we've basically gone back 15 years in wages. So that to me is, and obviously the government kind of likes bringing people in to sort of, oh, look, the economy's growing, but actually it's not really. Like GDP is growing, GDP per capita is going backwards. So everybody on the whole is actually getting poorer. Yeah,
but the country's getting richer, but per person, we're getting poorer.
Exactly. And which is largely why, like you say, before COVID, in the years before COVID, we had actually decent living standards. Things were pretty good. now I think it's just like the last few years. I mean, what do you think? I mean, I've sort of come out of COVID and I'm like, oh wow, Australia is a country that at least seems to me to be in decline. Like things seem to be getting worse. I don't know. Is this something that you've broadly? I know it's a broad term, but is this something that you've sort of clocked or seen?
Definitely. But me, from a personal point of view, me and my wife have started the business, and that business is going quite well. So, stuff like financially and that, I invested my money as well quite well pre-COVID, I thought. Nice. So stuff has went well for me, right? But I still see that same grocery bag costing 4 times what it did. I still see the prices of gas at $2. I still see my plane fares double at what they were. Now, me and my wife and I can get by. We can travel on holidays and we can do what we want to do because, I think that we are smart with our money, and, she set up a business that does earn well, and I have my investments and things like that. So from a personal perspective, yes, but from a society perspective, I have a lot of friends that were paying $500 a week on their mortgage, and now it's $750, $800. And you can see in the cutback that they have to make in their life. There's sacrifices now. And the thing that gets me so much is that interest rates are so high, but it was 3 weeks ago that Commonwealth Bank came out and said we made a $10 billion profit. That's billion with a B. That's not $2 billion. That's not $3 billion. That is $10 billion. A year ago, Qantas came out and said that they made a $2 billion profit. 6 weeks later, Barnaby Joyce resigned and left. Alan Joyce, resigned and left. It was like, so, and then the new CEO came in and said, we're going to make changes. But from my flying perspective, no changes have been made. Now, the government gave taxpayer dollars, $2 billion to Qantas during COVID to keep them afloat. And you could actually see the puppet master that Qantas became out of that, right? They had yes on their on their planes, and there were all a bunch of issues that the government were pushing, and you could tell that the government were saying to Qantas, you need to say this, this, and this because we saved you during COVID. And it's just crazy how big business works like that in the relationship with the government. And I think, just going back to your original question, that, I've seen it firsthand for people in Adelaide that are struggling, people that can't get into market. We were so lucky, me and my wife and I, that we were in the market pre-COVID and bought a house. So that was secure for us. So we didn't really matter. But the next generation coming through, a lot of them are thinking, what am I going to do? And it doesn't help when the immigration is still coming in. And look, I think the problem with the political system at the moment is that it doesn't matter if you're right or left, immigration numbers are going to keep coming in. Now, Albo came in and said, I'm going to reduce them. Didn't happen. If the right wing comes in and says, we're going to reduce them, like, will they reduce them or will they align with what their special interest owners are saying? Now, I think lately I was probably very middle leaning in my thoughts on politics, but right now I think the left is leaning that far left that I have no choice, that I've just been put into the right side. Now, you say stuff like there's an immigration crisis and everyone says straight away you're automatically a right-leaning person. But, if you care about anything in the future with anyone that is under the age of 30 trying to buy a house, doesn't matter what side you lean on, you want to be there for Australia. Yeah,
absolutely. It's a shame that it's gotten to that point. I mean, I say this as basically a right winger, and I'm glad to have you on side. But it is a shame that it's gotten to the point where it's the old saying. It's like I never left the left left me, right? Like, which is it is a shame. I mean, living standards. Immigration is a living standards issue as far as I'm concerned, and living standards should be across both sides. Look, in places like Denmark, pragmatic Denmark, right? They've got a left-wing government that has that has realized that immigration is a problem, and so they're doing stuff about it. They're like, because they realize that they brought too many in, and then some of them aren't assimilating and stuff like that. In Germany, there's a German left-wing political party that is against immigration. Like it seems easy. I think Australia and our politics, I mean, it largely is it's not as sophisticated or as far as advanced as Europe. And I do think as well, I mean, I think we may have been speaking about this previously, that it's no longer so much left and right these days, in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, there is a left and right, but there's also like there's a whole different sort of system where it's like high and low. Like it is the sort of, as we were talking about before, like the business government elites, and they're far too comfortable with each other. They're sharing chairman's lounges and giving each other top jobs. Like Bill Shorten just went from his position into the top university sort of thing. Like it, in my opinion, this is kind of like oligarchic behavior, right? Like these top people. There should be a separation between church and state, between business and government. In my opinion, they're far too comfortable. But yeah, where we found ourselves is that there's a high-low, but the low is too busy fighting itself over these cultural issues and calling each other racist and stupid and stuff like that. So if they stopped doing that and they sort of said, hold on, all of us are getting a bad deal here, we need to put pressure on the high, that would be the healthiest outcome. But unfortunately, things are fragmented. We need a unifying position. I mean, I agree. I don't think the Liberal Party is saying better things, don't get me wrong, but saying something and doing it is another. And also, I just don't know if they're being strong enough. I mean, they are dependent on donations from just the same people as the Labor Party, and it's becoming a democratic issue, frankly.
Yeah, and that's what people don't realise as well, is that big business, they donate to both parties. So when one party gets elected, they've still got a foot in the door with the other party. Now, this has happened time and time before. The only sort of difference is potentially that I know of, and I don't really know too much about Australian politics. It's not the rock show that American politics offer, so I'm way more into that. They have their presidential debates, they tour around like rock gods and dance on stage like Trump does, and there's all this stuff that goes along. So to me, it's just so much more interesting. But yeah, what a lot of people don't realise is that the donors, they donate, special interest donors, they donate to one party and both parties. So if someone gets elected, they're in. Well, what I was saying before was there are hardcore democratic people over in America like George Soros that won't give to the right-wing leaning and vice versa. Like Elon Musk is now on the right, he won't give to the left. So there's a bit of stuff like that over to their hardcore people over there. But in Australian politics, I don't think that that's the case. We don't go blue no matter who or red. It's not that craziness in American politics. So I think there is definitely special interest donors that donate to both parties, and then they just reap the rewards. And it doesn't matter who you vote for on the day. They're still going to have their say when there's laws to be written, or immigration to be had, or money to be printed, or roads to be built, or what pharmaceutical company is giving this or that. But it's interesting at the moment, I think, and I heard this on a podcast the other day with Russell Crowe and Joe Rogan, that the rise of the independence is coming, for better or for worse. And again, I don't really know too much about it. I read into it a bit, but there is like Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party has went from practically no votes 4 or 5 years ago to having almost 15 or 16% across the board now, which is massive. There's a lot of people that are seeing this immigration stuff and going, Pauline Hanson's been talking about this for 20 years. And there's a rise of independents that are coming as well. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think in America it's a bit more tribalized between red and blue, and you're either one or the other, and you can jump back and forwards. In Australia, I think Australia is largely an apathetic sort of a bit more relaxed about who they're voting for. There are, largely a bit more apathy around.
It's Australian culture as well, right?
Yeah.
They're a bit like, sort of thing.
Exactly. And I think, with that in mind, nobody is really, I think it's an old William Buckley quote. It's like, the best defense against a usurping government is an assertive citizenry. We're not terribly assertive, but I do think the major parties are losing their vote share more and more. I think Labor got in on 30% last time. It's so not huge amounts, and the independents are already sort of in the ascendancy. And I was speaking to a journalist about this a little while ago, and they sort of saying, look, I think the future of Australia is sort of a more European style politics where it's actually lots of little parties. And I think this is actually a good thing, because I do think that the major parties are becoming too sclerotic, too big. They're stuck in their ways.
Too controllable.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And to go back to your point about donors, if you actually there's a Guardian resource, the Guardian newspaper. If you go on there and you look at the donations, they give the exact same amount to Labor and Liberal. Yeah. It's like this. It's like what? Obviously, they're asking for something in return. But yeah. I fully welcome new parties, new independents, because the unfortunate thing, what that reflects, in my opinion, is that Australia, the Australian people and voters are sort of disintegrating, in that they're sort of tribalising into different special interest sort of groups and stuff like that. I mean, a funny one is legalised cannabis. I mean, nobody really thinks about legalised cannabis too much, but they're doing well. Like they almost cost Pauline Hanson her seat last time she ran, because they did so well. And I think partially that's because people are just turning off the political class, and they're like, I'm just going to vote because legalize cannabis, right?
Yeah.
So it's a super interesting thing, and I think it's going to be the next 20 years. Australian politics will be in flux. Like, we're already in this changing period. So.
Yeah, I think as well. What sort of political party you were just talking about that rivaled Pauline Hanson? Like, this is the power of social media. This is now the disinterest in your normal TV setting, where a lot of people don't watch TV anymore. Like, I haven't turned the only time I turn my TV on is to watch Netflix with my wife, and we'll have a movie on a Saturday night. I don't turn the TV on now, or I don't read newspapers ever since COVID, because I just think it's a bunch of horse shit, to be honest.
Largely it is, yeah.
And like, I'm getting a lot of my information these days from internet sites, which is, look, they can be controlled as well, but free speech platforms like X or Twitter. And I think a lot of people, younger people, starting to get the information from there these days. Now, look, it can be, the algorithms that you get yourself stuck into can be definitely one-sided, but if you jump on these information platforms and just Google stuff and read both sides of things, I think coming into the next political era with Australia, I think that's my one bit of advice. If you were to hear something from one politician, jump on a platform which lets you read about both sides of the argument and then make your opinion up. For too long, we have just been given one side of the argument. And it's almost been colluded and controlled to say, this is what you need to hear, and that's the right information. But I would say to people, and what I did during COVID, and thank God for my wife that did much more reading up on the mRNA vaccines as I did. Just you really got to do your own research these days, because unfortunately, yes, the media is, and the newspapers, they generally are controlled to what the government wants you to hear.
Yeah, no, that is I think that's pretty well true. I mean, it's another sort of arm of what I called before, the oligarchy. It is almost a control mechanism, and that's not to say it's an absolute control mechanism like in Soviet Russia or something like that, where they've got like a official sort of standing over them saying, write this. It's not there, but there is a sort of culture around it, and no doubt backroom conversations that sort of promote the pro-government line when it's not in the best interest of a free media. I think to go back to your point about social media, I think social media absolutely changes everything. I mean, you've now got people.
Well, look at what we're doing now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And like, I can broadcast this, and with snippets out of it, I could have 150,000 views across, Instagram, Twitter, my YouTube channel. I get 150,000 views on shorts, which bring people to listen to this, and then they go,
Yeah.
It's very different to what the politicians are telling us.
Yeah, that's completely right. And I mean, we wouldn't have been on, Q&A on Monday night, right? Like we wouldn't have been on the panel, but now we can still be seen by 150,000 people. And I often think about, the early 2000s for the West was a strange period. It was very much like the zenith of this sort of government media thing. And I always think that, if we had Twitter back in 2004 or whatever, or 2002, we probably wouldn't have invaded Iraq, right? Because
Yes.
or things like that, because they had such a stranglehold on the media that people at the end were pro-invading Iraq, right? So I think I'm very bullish. I think any new movement, any new political change, whether it's media or in party politics, will have to be digital first. It can't focus on the media anymore. The media industry, I mean, journos and whatnot that I speak to, they're all worried about losing their jobs and things like that. And like I said, the media, just the same as politics, is changing, and people are scared about it. I think this is fantastic. I think this is a massive, massive opportunity for people like ourselves.
It's ensuring that free speech is kept free speech. You know what I mean? Like I can get my voice out there, and I can start a podcast channel, and I can say what I want in there. If it's not, if I'm not coming across and saying this and really bad this and really bad that, if I'm just bringing across facts, it is harmless. But some people, it's not.
Well, you are, by challenging the sort of regime media, as people call it, you're harming them, and you're harming their power. And I do have a feeling that they're gonna, and probably already are trying to crack down on it, because it does challenge them a bit. I mean, we do not have pro-free speech people in Parliament on either side. They ultimately, what they care about is keeping their position in this, what I would call like a managerial sort of system. We're no longer, we're no longer absolute democracies anymore. It's more a form of this bureaucratic-led managerialism, I think, and we sort of have semblances of democracy and semblances of a free media, but it's not quite as absolute as we'd like. And when they do get challenged by people like Musk, I mean, look at what advertisers are doing to Musk, and people. I think some guy a couple of weeks ago said that we should threaten Musk with arrest. These people are obviously scared about losing their position on top of the.
That was the European Union.
Oh, was it?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, there you go. One of the biggest bureaucracies in the world.
And then the guy on Telegram, the guy that started Telegram or was a CEO, got arrested in France.
I still haven't heard anything about that.
No. Look, I didn't read too much into it because I just had better things to do, and I just thought, look, it's Telegram. But that's, again, like another thing where he wasn't willing to abide by certain rules. Like, look what happened to Albanese and the church stabbing, right? They demanded that Elon Musk take that off their platform. He's like, hey, so you want me to take it off worldwide? And they're like, yes. He's like, no, I'm not taking that down worldwide. You know what I mean? So these...
It's such a...
and this control from the government, look what happened to Joe Rogan in the COVID era, where he had some, doctors come on and give some very good points about ivermectin and not taking the vaccines. He got bashed by the media, not physically, but he got word bashed by the media. They threatened Spotify to take his podcast down. Spotify stood tall and said, well, actually, Joe Rogan, we'll give you $100 million deal to keep going. And it turns out that later down the road, that ivermectin was probably the way for the early treatment, right, rather than the mRNA vaccine. And, the deal with the ivermectin was that the pharmaceutical companies couldn't make money off it, but they could with the vaccines because they could patent it. Which, again, just goes to show that, was it about the safety or was it about money?
No, that's exactly right. That's, it's cynical if it was, but the profit. This is why I never really agree with libertarians on in absolute libertarianism, because they always sort of say the free market will solve all, and my problem is the profit motive has driven instances like that of big governments who are sort of big businesses who pressure and lobby governments to enact these silly laws that make them money and hurt us. So
Yeah, and I don't think these like I don't know, people might call me a conspiracy theorist, but I don't think these things are set up, right? I don't think COVID was set up or anything like that. But I do think big business took the opportunity when they seen it there, to profit off it, and they did. They just went, all right, where can we fill our pockets here with all this type of stuff, and I honestly think, especially with the American border, with what's happening lately. I was listening before, it's something like 25 million, approximately 15 to 25 million that across the border within the past year maybe. And there's a theory out there that the Democrat Party are letting them do it because they want more voters to vote for them. And there's a bill that the Republican Party are trying to put through that you have to have voter ID before you vote in the upcoming elections, which the Democrat Party are against. And then if I come out and say that, I get called a conspiracy theorist about it. But it's like, hang on, there's some pretty clear facts there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, to be fair, we're gonna get called all sorts of things like conspiracy theorists and whatnot anyway. So, but no, I think I really don't think it is a conspiracy theory. I mean, even somebody else in Australia, a Labor-aligned pollster, he specifically said that when this percentage of migrants come in, they will be voting Labor. And it was a bit of a boast. It was a bit of a celebration. It wasn't necessarily him saying that's the plan, but it does sort of show that there is a direct financial motive to doing that. Now, is it the full reason that Labor is high migration? I'm not sure. I don't think so. It takes a while for people to become citizens, but but
eventually they become a citizen, right?
Yeah, exactly. And
So it doesn't matter if this year's immigration can vote, but it matters for them for 2 years ago.
No, it's so exactly true.
There's the flow-on effect.
And they've done the studies. There are literally papers and reports in Australia that show that migrants do disproportionately vote Labor. And the Liberal Party, I think, aren't quite realising this and are still being pro-migration. I'm kind of like, well, guys, you're setting yourself up for failure here. But can I ask you a question as
Go.
well? So
I love this. I love when people ask me questions. Go.
So you're ex-military?
Yeah. Deployed to, so I was with 3RR, so shout out to all my 3RR mates out there. We went to Afghanistan in 2012.
Nice.
Yep.
Nice. Excellent. Can I ask, the military, the ADF, have been having problems recruiting. Do you have thoughts on why that is?
I just think the next generation is not willing to fight for a country that's not willing to fight for them.
No, that's really well put. And because I can't remember if I was speaking to somebody or somebody sort of said, if you can't buy a house in your country, if you can't start your life,
why would you go fight for them?
Exactly. Yeah.
When I joined the military, my brother bought his first house in Adelaide for $220,000 with a $20,000 deposit. I was 18 at the time. No, sorry, I was 16 at the time. He was 18.
Wow.
He worked in a job with my dad, saved up 20 grand, staying at home with my parents. He went and had a deposit on his house for 200 grand in an area that we grew up in that was not that bad in Adelaide. It's the northeastern suburbs. If you keep going further out, it does get a little bit hairy, but it's in a very nice, safe area in Adelaide. Now, one, that $20,000 is not getting saved anymore because everything is 4 to 5 times the price. And now that $20,000 will not even get you a foot in the door at talking to a real estate agent to get a house. No. So why would anyone join the military if the country that they're joining aren't willing to fight for them?
It's a great point, and it really goes back to patriotism, I suppose. And am I right in saying as well that the instead of trying to remedy this by sort of putting younger people's interests first and getting them interested in fighting for their country, instead of doing this, that the government is now talking about bringing in fighters from overseas and stuff like that? Is that correct?
I haven't heard. No, okay. Look, I'm not really across the military too much. Look, when I left the military, didn't really have too much to do with them after that. I sort of got out. I got out in 2014 to a year and a half after my Afghan tour. Like a lot of people that come back from Afghan, it was time to sort of get out of the military.
Yeah,
But
right.
no, I don't really know too much about that. I know that the military, I still talk to guys that are in, and it's a different military.
Oh, is that right?
It is a different space. It was really a man's world. And look, I'm not being, I'm just speaking very real. It was a man's world, especially the unit that I was in. It was a tough. They called us the old bastards because we were just that's what the reputation of the unit was. And you grew up really quickly in a place like that, especially when I was 18 joining that unit. But I was talking to a friend the other day about this. It turned out that having that really tough man mentality bred good soldiers that did a good job when we were in Afghanistan. Well, we wouldn't have done what we did over there if we weren't tough and hard, which is the exact environment that you needed to be at to fight in a war.
Absolutely.
So, and look, I don't know what's happening at the moment. I don't know if that's moving away. I'm assuming that 100% that is happening. But when I was leaving, they were talking about having women in the infantry. That wasn't my decision to leave at all. I didn't really care, but now I look back on it, especially the experiences that I've had. You go weeks and weeks without showering in Afghanistan. You'd practically going through earth hell. And you just think to yourself, is this a great environment for a female to be in? No, I don't think it's not at all. I think there had to be restrictions on that sort of thing. So whether that's changed the outcome of it, but yeah, look, I just think, we're just living in a very changeable, very quickly changing world that has affected growth intake in the military. You look in the American military, they are down numbers everywhere as well. So it's not just happening in Australia; it's happening across the board.
No, that's right, and they're having the same problems as well. And actually, speaking to people in the cops, they're having the exact same problems. I mean, if you don't have a stake in the country, you're not going to become a civic-minded, dutiful person who wants to sort of fight for it. And it's an absolute tragedy. And so instead, governments realizing this, instead of sort of saying, oh, well, maybe we should fix the problems that have created this, they're saying, well, why don't we just bring in police from overseas? Like this is something that they're actively considering, if not already doing.
Which is crazy. Yeah. Absolutely crazy. Yeah. And look, I think a good question that I just thought up on myself to ask myself, would I join the army right now? Like the reason I joined the army back in 2009 when I was actually 2008 when I was at the end of my schooling career, I finished year 12 and joined the army. The reason I did that is because I had a cousin that was serving in 2 Commando Unit, the Special Forces community here in Sydney. He talked it up and there was a bit of patriotism about me that I wanted to serve my country. Would I join now at the same time knowing what Australia is doing? No, of course I wouldn't. But if there was a world war happening, would I go defend Australia if I was asked to? You're fucking goddamn right I would. You're goddamn right I would, because I would not want anything to happen to my family in Adelaide or anywhere across the world. If we went to actual war with someone and we lost, we get dictated to by them about what happens. And what happens to my wife then, or what happens to my family back in Adelaide if circumstances in Australia change. So that's the reason why I would go. I would go for my family, not for my country.
Oh, good man. And likewise, you'd fight for your family, but would you fight for your government right now?
I wouldn't go willingly join, but if we were under attack, I would definitely.
Let me put to you a hypothetical. Let's say that a more patriotic in 10 years, a more patriotic sort of government sort of swings in and they sort of said, right, we're going to start putting Australians first, and they put in policies that would be putting housing foremost, getting younger people into housing and swings. Could you see a culture shift that people would have renewed interest in joining the military and stuff?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely, because and there would have to be that swing, right? For me, I would say, let me see it for a couple of years, work first. I want to see the proof in the pudding. I want to see the outcome. But definitely, I definitely think there could be, but I think we're going to a place which is, it's fast becoming irreversible. And, if we don't do something about it soon, then we're going to be in a bit of a state where I don't know what's going to happen, and that's really concerning. But I think one of the main things is putting Australians first, getting patriotism back, uniting Australia under one banner. Right? There is so much stuff at the moment where there's bits and pieces drawn from X, Y, and Z, and I come from here, you come from there. This is where I was before. This is where I am now. It's like we are under the Australian banner. That's who we are as people. We have Indigenous people, First Nations people that date back 3,000 years here. We're all Australian. So let's start acting like one nation.
Yeah, and that's where strength and unity sort of comes from. I mean, if you look at the top of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, right, it's got two flags up there. It's like, well, which one would people be fighting under, right? Like, it's hard to sort of unify under two flags. But I think you're absolutely right. I guess my concern, like yours, is that if people aren't sort of civic minded and joining the military, you're kind of creating a lost generation. And I think if institutions as strong as the police force, right, one of the original institutions, or the military, are weakening and they're getting softer and they're losing people, like this is I think a lot of people, like young guys, especially like us, have this serious, almost civilizational concern for what's coming down the corner. Like the way that things are trending, like it's hard to be optimistic and have hope.
Yeah.
But I think, it also spurs you to action, right? So I'm sure it was like if you think things are wrong, then you take action, which is why was a part of the reason why I started this podcast and why I started talking about immigration. So short term, I often say short term I'm bearish. Like short term, I think it's going to be a rough ride. But long term, I'm optimistic because I know that there are good people out there who recognize the situation that we're in and are going to put in a lot of effort to correct it and fix it. And Australia is completely worth fighting for, and Australians are worth fighting for. So.
Yeah, I bet you, like, if you would go around on the street and you would ask people, would they fight for Australia? Every 99% of them would say definitely yes, because they have that patriotism about them. And we're like a young shin boner, hard-working nation party. We live under the red hot sun, but we've got beautiful scenery, we've got beautiful people, and we are diverse as well, right? Like everyone 100 years ago was a migrant from somewhere, whether that be my family came from Ireland, whether someone else came from Italy. I have so many Italian friends in Adelaide because it's the area we live in. The school I go to, all their parents are Italian. Most of them can speak Italian because that's the family they grew up in. Now, I'm sure you're not saying as well that we need to cut immigration, but it definitely needs to be pulled back.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying no more migrants forever, but I think, like, not to autistically bang on about numbers as well, but it is a numbers game in a certain sense. Like the mates that you have in Adelaide, I was about to say Italy, in Adelaide, and likewise my friends in Brisbane and here as well. They I would consider them, Australians. They assimilated and just as Aussie, if not more than some. And the problem is that when you bring in so many people and you don't take efforts to sort of assimilate them, and you bang on about sort of multiculturalism, and then they then stay within only their own culture, it suddenly goes from migration benefiting to migration actually hurting. I mean, that's when community tensions play out. If you're going to come in, it should be at a rate that is easily sort of digestible for the country and easily for them to integrate and assimilate and become Australians. But if you start creating silos, which if you go to some parts of Melbourne, Brisbane, Sydney, they're starting to turn into enclaves, and that's not. I don't think that's a healthy thing. That's not to denigrate the people, right? But look, like you say, we should be under one banner, not multiple sort of things. So.
And look, don't forget where you come from. But like you're in Australia, and there's rules that we abide by here to have a functioning society that isn't a war-torn country that doesn't get overthrown by dictators and bad things like that. We're in a law-abiding citizen country where you got to do the right thing.
No, that's you should not bring foreign conflicts to Australian shores, and because at that point, like you're starting, Australians will start saying, well, hold on, why is this really my fault? Why is this my problem? Sort of thing.
Yeah.
So,
Look, we're going to start to wrap this up
Great.
because I've got to grab a flight out of here in a couple of hours. But, it's been absolutely fascinating sitting down and talking to you. The one thing that I will say at the moment that I'm weirdly not weirdly been thinking about, but it's funny how things are aligning that there's mass immigration in America, there's mass immigration in France, there's mass immigration in Italy, there's mass immigration in England, and now there's mass immigration in Australia. And it all seems to be happening at once. Now, I don't think there is some conspiracy theory behind it where they're trying to flood the Western world with, migrants from all over the world. I think, and this is what I put it down to, is the US in 2020 went from something like $18 trillion in circulation to like 40-something trillion dollars in circulation. The European Union followed suit because once the US start printing, everyone starts printing. Australia followed that in suit as well. So, we went from $1 trillion in circulation in 2020 to 1.6 in 2024. Now, the Fed started in 1972. So we took 50 years to print 1 trillion and we took 4 years to print 600 billion. So what's that, like a 33% increase or something like that in 4 years, when that first bit took us 50 years. So around the world, there has been an increase in money like we have never, ever seen ever before, right? The Roman Empire did it years ago and it pretty much collapsed them with the amount of inflation that they had as well. So I think we're at a dangerous time where money needs to be corrected and checked now more than ever. But I also think that more money in circulation, more people need to be in that country. So that's my theory on why this is happening.
Yeah, it's. I've actually heard others sort of put forward that somebody has called it like quantitative peopling, I think.
Yeah.
Where they sort of bring people in, and so to avoid mass inflation, they sort of spread it thin. Look, to be perfectly frank, I would not put that past governments. I don't know whether it is the reason or not, but I've not looked into it enough. But I definitely wouldn't put it past treasuries and things like that. To sort of. Yeah, I mean, you brought up the Roman Empire. I do think, like, are there sort of direct reasons for why we sort of landed where we are in terms of mass immigration across the West, or is there something just a bit more almost like biological in that civilizations basically have a sort of timeline, an arc to them. It depends on how far
I've read these theories and they're so intriguing.
Well, and somewhat terrifying. I mean, there's an old German writer who sort of says that, civilizations are basically biological. They go through, infancy and adolescence and sort of old age and whatnot. And, just like the human does. And, you could argue that the West is sort of in its later stages, and and this is sort of what happens historically, that when a civilization is sort of towards its end, is that as we've seen, lots of migrants come in, we have serious financial problems, culture starts disintegrating, it's things like that. But
there's also a great theory there as well that. And fucking, I am going to get hated for saying this, but who gives a fuck? That societies and evolutions and the Roman Empire and the Greek Empire, they became almost so fixated on gender, and it seemed to be right at the end of their civilization that they became fixated on weird stuff like that. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen to us. I'm just saying it's a weird timing for this to come about, right? for people to come out and say that there's 50 genders and stuff like that. Now, look, if you're above the age of 18, my point of view, do what you want. Yeah. Do it as long as it doesn't harm me or you're not hurting me. If you want to be a free person, and I think I can say this as well because I've fought for your freedoms. If you want to have the freedom of choice to do what you want to do, that is your business. But I'm just saying it's really weird that it happened to the Greek Empire and then the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
They got fixated with stuff like that. But,
No, that's right.
but that is a very, very tinfoil hat theory, and I love reading about that sort of stuff. It's just interesting. Joe Rogan mentioned on his podcast where I thought, that's interesting. I might read up on about it, and it actually did happen. Like before they collapsed, they became infused with gender and all this sort of different stuff. So
yeah, I think Douglas Murray sort of talks about it as well. I mean, it is just a coincidental sort of pattern, sort of like you say. But history, may not be. History rhymes, right? It may not repeat itself, but it does rhyme in some instances. I mean, who really knows?
Well, look. To be honest, I don't think we're at the end of our civilization. I think there's a long way to go. But people like yourself, I think, if we continue to have conversations like this, very free-flowing conversations that are free speech conversations, and people let us have these conversations, I think they are very beneficial to get points of argument across and points where people wouldn't have listened otherwise to our arguments. And it's thankful for stuff like podcasts and blogging and YouTube channels and stuff like that, and Twitter feeds. So, look, mate, I've got one question to wrap up for you, and I ask this to all my guests. So, looking back, if you could give your 18-year-old self just one bit of advice about life, what would it be?
Yeah, that's a good one. I'd give him like 100 pieces of advice, but
yeah.
I'd stop playing video games. But no, no, it would be. Look, this is it's a good question. I think you can take it many ways. I think depends on the person. I think I would say just kind of back yourself. I think if you're if you defer to what everybody else says, and you let other people sort of guide your direction, you're only ever going to be miserable. But if you I think we all have an internal drive. I don't know. I mean, I'm not terribly a religious or spiritual person, but I think people do have this almost historical drive in them. I don't know whether it's biological or spiritual, but they do have something in them that is beyond just pure reason and rationality. That is a internal sort of thing, and you have to listen to that, and you have to back that. And even if it's uncomfortable and it means making uncomfortable changes, like, for example, talking about immigration, you just got to lean into it because that's your thing, and that's where your success probably will, I think, come from. You cannot create a life that you invented in your head. You have to go with the one that you sort of have been. You're sort of. I hate to. It sounds so cheesy. Well, there is a bit of a destiny sort of element to
I agree.
To life. Yeah.
And even if that path means that you might get criticised away, or it might be really fucking hard, right? But if you feel that calling that you need to do it and you need to start speaking up about stuff, back yourself in, because there's not enough people like that around. There isn't.
Yeah.
There
and,
isn't.
and like you say, it's hard. It might be very difficult, but on the balance of things, it's actually much better, much easier to lean into it than it is to sort of avoid it, because you're just going to be tormented, and if you don't lean into it, and you will always regret it. So that's my
definitely thought. No, I agree with that. Look, mate, if someone wants to get in contact with you that's listened to this podcast and they've got questions, or they want to follow you on social media, where can they find you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just get Googling. Google Migration Watch Australia. We have pretty active on TikTok and Twitter.
Yeah.
We have a website as well, so you can contact us through those mediums, and also just like I don't know, Jordan Knight on Twitter is another way. But other than that, if you see me in the street or something, say good day. But, yeah.
Good stuff, Jordan. Well, look, mate, that's been you're my episode 20. So
excellent, nice.
Apparently, if I get to 22 episodes, I'll be in the top 1% of podcasts. But,
excellent. Well, here's the 2 more, eh?
Yeah, that's it. So I've actually got another 4 guests lined up for the next 4 weekends, so they're going to be fun. But look, mate, that's been a really enjoyable podcast. But look, mate, I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for the open discussion. And look, if you're ever in Adelaide, hit me up and grab a coffee.
Absolutely. I'd love to. I really appreciate it. Cheers, mate.
Good stuff.
So.